Hey everybody, it's March 14th, 2017, and this is your episode 87 of At Percussion. I'm your host, Casey Cangelosi, and with me, as always, is my crack team of percussion researchers, doctors, and scientists. And we'll start with Laurel Black. How's it going?
Hi, good. Snow day!
Snow day, that's true.
How much snow did you get?
Like 5 inches, not very much.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Enough to have a snow day.
It's the nice thing about, the same thing happened at our last gig too. You know, we live in a small city, pretty small city, and then surrounding is a lot of rural areas. So even if the snow's not too bad here, some people's commutes are brutal.
Right,
so
yeah.
we'll get a snow day now and again.
Nice.
And Megan Arns is here. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, thanks. Ben Charles, what's up, buddy?
I'm doing well. It is not snowing here. I rode my bike today.
Texas is lame.
Yeah, it's like 65 degrees out.
Oh, that's so nice, though.
Well, guys, he is a composer, performer, a teacher, and an improviser. He teaches at the University of Alabama and is on faculty at Chosen Vale International Percussion Seminar. He has been both figuratively and literally, and I mean this in the most positive way possible, all over the map with his improvisation, commissions, clinics, and lectures, compositions, and concerts. He also creates the very beloved miniature musical masterworks in his spare time, and his name's Tim Feeney. How's it going?
Fantastic. That's the best introduction for anything I've had in my life. And
I should have borrowed that from the masterclass.
Yeah, you should have. That's good.
Well, hey, tell us a little bit about what you're doing there with Megan and maybe how the masterclass was.
Well, the masterclass was fantastic. Actually, that became more of like what I think of as like a composer sort of talk that I've seen in my experience. That there's, so I'm here sort of working with the students in private lessons, and we're putting on a concert tomorrow night of a couple of my compositions that are sort of loose text pieces involving electronics. And there's a lot of that if people come to a concert, they can see and sort of experience, but I can't really show it to them sort of on the fly, like as a player. So this afternoon was, as I've seen composers do, like so more PowerPoint and hopefully sort of discussing like ideas that I'm interested in. And it's good. I think they seem receptive and excited about things. It's delightful to see Jacob Gottlieb, who is a close friend of mine from when he lived in Louisville, to sort of show up at an event here. It's awesome that he's working here at Missouri too, and it's great. You know, my interaction with the students is wonderful. I love Megan to death. It's great being here. We have snuggles, yeah. 2 awesome meals so far. This is great. Being the guest is awesome, as we all know, but being the guest is awesome.
Being Megan's guest is awesome. She treats them good. She knows Megan knows everybody.
It is definitely true.
Yeah, right. Anyway, it's been awesome. It was cool. We invited the composition seminar to come to our percussion studio masterclass too. So we kind of had a mix of composers and percussionists today, and we've been doing a lot of that this year. And it's been fun to kind of create a bond between those 2 studios and do collaborative projects together. But I'm excited about this concert tomorrow because Tim's going to do a solo piece. And then he and I and Bill Kalinkos, clarinet, are going to improvise something. And then the students are doing 2 other pieces, one with Tim and I. And it's been fun to put that together. We're doing it in a little art gallery. And
thank you for helping me feel at home by doing that.
It's going to be fun.
Concert halls make me nervous, as we've sort of discussed. Or more correctly, the other way, like art galleries make me happy, and grain silos make me happy, and those other sorts of experiences make me happy. So that means a lot to me.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah. And I guess I don't know what the art exhibit is right now. We're going to go check it out. But the gallery curator said that it was would be a perfect kind of mix of art with music too. So it'll be fun. So if you're in Columbia tomorrow, before this episode is released,
which is in about 3
I'll
weeks
tell Facebook,
from now.
I hope you went. But Tim's doing private lessons, and we're doing he coached percussion ensemble today and things like that. So it's been a lot of fun.
Definitely.
Hey, I'd like to ask you, Tim, since you said the composition studio showed up as well. What do you think the 2 different studios, percussion students and composition students, if you had to kind of summarize what each of their, collectively, what are they each trying to get from you as a clinician? Do you find they ask a different type of question?
Well, hopefully I didn't put them into too much of a sleep, that we didn't have too much of a conversation this afternoon. But, I mean, I suppose as a general sort of topic, like if people, especially if percussionists know who I am, they know like I was with So Percussion 15 years ago, or they know I'm the professor at Alabama. And, you know, most folks in that circumstance, like, until they've seen what I do, like, are now asking for help coaching whatever marimba repertoire they're doing, or like whatever they're working on for their recitals. Composers, I'm not sure. Like, it's not often I've kind of done a presentation like this explicitly for them. Like, for the most part, like, folks from those scenes tend to show up around the fringes of things that I do. Like, they'll hear about it and then grab me afterwards or something. So, like, I hadn't really had a chance to put this up explicitly in front of folks studying that before.
Great.
I'm dying to hear what they have to say about that. That I know, I'm pretty sure I'm probably the farthest left person that would show up for a given event like that. You know, so our schools are roughly comparable, and I know it's the case at home and at Alabama. That, you know, this sort of abstract work with sound it's out if you haven't experienced it already, and sometimes it opens up someone's head that it'll come to something positive down the road. Sometimes it turns people off, probably as often as not. I don't know. I suppose that's provocation to think about a thing as much as any material I can convey about how to do a thing. And hopefully that's a takeaway from today. Like, as much as anything, like, you know, I'm of the flannel, like, question authority, like, you know, kill your idol sort of generation. And hopefully maybe that subtext to things that, you know, that I can bring to the world. Like, well, why do you have to do a thing this way, etc. And I can't say how I would hope that would take hold, but it's what in a way, I hope this is what takes hold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, and the person who tied, or I guess is kind of responsible for bringing the composers in is Jacob Gottlieb. Like Tim mentioned, he's the managing director of the New Music Initiative here at Mizzou, and they're friends. And so that was, I think I would have thought to invite the composition studio, but Jacob was really kind of the one that made it happen, which is kind of cool too. And also the way that we were able to bring Tim here is kind of unique. There are SEC faculty travel grants between SEC schools. So yeah, Alabama and Missouri. So Tim wrote a SEC travel grant for that, and I'm going to do the same and try to go there next year. So
cool.
Yeah,
I
wonderful.
didn't know Missouri was in the SEC.
It is.
Right?
Right? It seems a little out of the way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that's so cool. Yay.
Yeah.
We need more schools to beat up in football. Roll Tide, yes.
Very important. Very important.
Yeah. I'm from Tennessee, so I grew up hearing all about SEC. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the current projects that you have going on with just like maybe a recent composition or some of the projects that you're telling us about, maybe one or two.
I mean,
Awesome.
As I was saying in the class, like there's a fairly, well, I can't say it's a fairly large community because it's sort of it's a niche activity, but you know, there are groups of 5 or 6 people like interested in the sort of free improvisation I play, you know, scattered through the country. There's a flavor of musicians sort of working with the stuff in Chattanooga, and there's one in Atlanta, and there's one in New Orleans. I found it as a derelict grad student in Boston in the early 2000s, which has a really strong community and profile for the ways that those folks make sound. And a nice thing about sort of working in these threads is like basically you go to travel and you meet your friends, but like there's not like the rehearsal like bootstrapping that has to happen to make like what we think of as shreddy chamber music happen. Like I can show up and play duo with Tim Barnes in Louisville, and that's a way to reconnect with him, and we can make music together. And then as I go on tour through there's Pete Fosco in Cincinnati, and there's a scene in Cleveland. And now once I'm in Cleveland, I'm 2 hours from Buffalo, and now I'm playing the Silos, and therefore I can go back home, or I can go back to Ithaca, New York, where my trio mate in the group Meridian, Sarah Hennies, lives right now. And it's just sort of this itinerant sort of traveling way of working things. So I sort of divide my time between sort of planning solo tours / opportunities to work with people as the geography permits. And then there are a few things that are steadier. So for example, I've been playing duo with a cellist named Vic Rawlings in Boston since 2005. And we can find time to connect maybe once a year or every 18 months. Meridian is my trio with Sarah and Greg Stewart, who teaches at South Carolina, and is like one of Michael Pizarro's like leading interpreters, for example. So we've been playing together for 4 years, and as we can find it, like we bash our calendar headache and figure out where we can carve out a week every 9 or 12 months. And in the aggregate, that sort of leads up to sort of my activity as an improviser. And that stuff happens as often as not in basement house shows and bookstores and the odd art gallery and places like this extraordinary movie theater called Dreamland in Louisville that Tim Barnes has opened and is making work 6 nights a week off experimental music and art. Like pretty much outside all of like the promotional and economic and sort of public structures that we associate with like maybe more formalized music. Composition's a new thing. Like it scares me talking about because I don't really know what I'm doing, as I mentioned in the class, except like I have some ideas about putting together sound that I've adopted from my time as an improviser. And now people are starting to ask for instructions for like, hey, what if we wanted to do a thing that works like you? And now I have to figure out how to do that. Let's see, I did a piece for my wife, Wendy Richmond, who's one of the founders of International Contemporary Ensemble, and Eric Carlson, who's the violin professor at UC San Diego, that we did at Abrams in New York on the opening ice festival for the year. I had a piece for 10 brass players and hand drums used as speakers out at Cal Arts in December. And actually, so I have a trip coming up in April that's a residency at South Carolina with Greg Stewart, who he has an experimental music seminar in the Honors College there. So he's asked for a piece for his 16 students, plus himself, myself, Elise Tessier, the flutist in ice, and Philip Snyder, who's a grad student in flute at South Carolina. So I've been scrambling to figure out text that'll help steer what they're doing, and we'll see how that works. And I have my fingers crossed, and I'll come back from it excited and then wanting to cry, and that'll lead to another thing sort of in the summer. And there's a little bit of chamber music coming up this summer as well too. But once May hits, as you know, or as you all know as academics, like that's the time to go to sleep and watch dumb movies because that's not going to happen any other time. And yeah, I need that. So like there's sort of this balance between like carving out time to do everything I want and just time to like help my head clear. So the summer before Chosen Vale really is a good time for me to do that.
Wow. Yeah. Very cool. Very, very busy.
It's a dense time. Definitely.
Yeah, well, it's great. Very, very good. Laurel, you have some things for us today, right?
I do. So, a question to start my segment today, which sounds more like you guys. When it comes to your practice in your process and your frequency, would you describe your habits as more of a compulsion or an addiction? So, these are both behaviors that psychologists and neuroscientists have been trying to figure out for some time in terms of what makes them different. And they say that both compulsions and addictions are behaviors that are somehow about control over your life. And researchers are looking to define, well, wait, what are the exact things that makes a behavior addictive versus a compulsion? So this article comes from Mindful Magazine, which is one of my favorite things that I read every month when it shows up. And there are just a few things that I'll sum up from it. In addiction, goes the emerging understanding, begins with a flash of pleasure overlaid with an itch for danger. So it's fun to gamble or to drink, and it puts you at risk for losing something. Addictions bring pleasure, though they also build up a tolerance over time. And as the addict requires more and more of the behavior to get the same result. So compulsions, by contrast, are about avoiding unpleasant outcomes. So whereas addiction is about seeking out something pleasurable that you like, compulsion is about avoiding something unpleasant that you don't like. Compulsions are born out of anxiety and are strangers to joy. They're repetitive behaviors we engage in over and over to alleviate the angst brought on by the possibility of negative consequences. So this is where I get to thinking about, what is practice then? Because it's something we do all the time. It's probably our most repetitive behavior as musicians and as professional people in this world. And I got to thinking, am I like addicted to practice, or is it one of my compulsive behaviors because I really don't want to sound bad? So that's why I practice, to like avoid something like that. And the last part of the article just says a compulsion, in short, differs from an addiction because the initial impetus is alleviating anxiety, not finding pleasure.
Huh.
Seems like it's a little bit of both, right? Like, I feel like I don't know, it's I would describe mine as an addiction more because I feel like when I don't do it, like when I don't practice and I don't write, I literally feel like almost itchy. Like I feel like, there's like a film on my skin. But by those definitions, I don't know if there's what's the element of risk, by practicing. So in that way, it's not an addiction.
Or like sometimes, or can it be different things in different times? Like an addiction where you're like, oh, I want to do this project and I want to do that and this, and you sign yourself up for all these things and plan all these things, and then you get to a point where you're like, oh crap, I have all this stuff coming up and things are getting really dense, and then it feels more like a negative thing, like you're avoiding, or you're participating to not have a negative outcome, as you said, and then in the moment it's enjoyable, and then when you're doing it you're like, this is why I do this, that's why I said yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like performing is super addictive to me. Like I love performing, and so then it's like I'll practice so I could perform again, but then it's also like, I just don't want to sound bad.
I can't say this is explicitly part of an artist statement, but I know an awful lot of things I've been doing since like my early 20s are like trying to unask that. Like I hate performing. Like it physically hurts somehow.
Really?
And like the more emotively so, like the more wrong I feel in that circumstance.
Wow.
It's really, really wild. Like I remember, it's 2003. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I've been like shredding heavy duty percussion music like we all do as students with that. And then the first time I'm going to go improvise in public is with a thereminist in Boston named James Coleman, who's a dear friend and an extraordinary musician. And, like I could feel my ears burning. Mm-hmm. And now like that's the combination of things. But at the time it's like, I can't believe anybody is listening to this. There's no way this works. I must be embarrassing myself. Get me out of here.
Wow.
And by 2006, that had flipped the other way, and now it is still permanent. Like anytime I have to play notes in public now, forget it. Like that, that's not even compulsion. Like I can't handle it. Like, and I started my life as an orchestra player, and it's obvious really quick. Like I'm not wired to handle that. Like I'm not wired to handle adrenaline, and I'm not wired to handle feeling like I have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. So I suppose the sorts of things I've been involved with, as you saw in the class today, or like improvising with sounds, or like working with like really, really austere materials, or like unask that. Like the more, like if I take myself away, now we can just hang out with this thing that is like growing up in front of us. So is that compulsive or addictive? I don't know. Do I gain pleasure from it? Like when playing, it's extraordinary, but it's not like, at least for me, like isn't like, it doesn't feel like a dopamine reward sort of experience. It's just like, oh, here's something neat happening that I didn't expect. Like, let's go explore that. And now
you enjoy that process of exploration.
And now I feel like literally like a 6-year-old, like, holy cow, I've got Legos. This is awesome. So I guess that is sort of a dopamine release. And I suppose flip with it in terms of stuff Casey was saying, like February is my lock to my desk month. Like, so inside 3 weeks, I have a week-long honor band festival. I have a week-long all-state orchestra festival. I have 2 audition days. And then I have like our state like music performance assessment tech. So my building is overrun with high school students 3 weeks out of 4, and it's all I can do is like run marimbas around our recital rooms. Like I can't make anything of my own. I can't get my teaching done. And now I feel like you do, where like I'm sort of clawing at my skin.
Yeah.
But with that sort of comes like more than like avoidant behavior. It's like my energy is depleted. Like I need to start like setting up the next things. And this is a non-answer to the question, but energy. Like I don't have time, and it's more just I'm tapped, and like being tapped and not doing things like makes me have like the negative feelings I suppose that I would be trying to avoid if I was compelled to do this.
Yeah.
But in the middle of March especially, I would be just as psyched just to hang out with your 2 like the cats from your house. If we just hung out there for 2 days and then I flew home on Thursday, I would be happier than whatever. It'd be like, oh, this is great. Except for now I'm questioning in my own head, like, I'm done. I don't have another idea. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
And like those are new experiences for me. This is totally a non-answer to your question. So I don't know if that's addictive or compulsive.
That's interesting. Now, I mean, you and Casey both what you and Casey both mentioned is interesting, because I think that, the busier that we get, or that the the more involved things get at school at certain times. It's the same as in grad school too, when like you get really busy, and then the first thing to go, at least for me, it's like I stop exercising or I stop eating well, and then it's just like worse,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm always harping on my students about that, but it's it's so important, and it's really hard to do. And I think it's creatively that sometimes I don't admit that that's one of the issues too, but it's that like we're not creating, or we're not. That if that's an outlet for us, that could be something that's missing too. Even though you're teaching music, it's like I definitely feel that need to create and to perform. And
I'd be interested in talking to you about this 3 years from now.
Yeah.
I'm approaching the end of my 5th year at my school. Issues like tenure up or down are coming up in my future next year, and it's been a really nice sort of carrot encouraging me to make things over the last 5 years, and it's a really tough stick where it's like always be producing.
Yeah.
Like I have to keep producing in order to keep my job.
Sure.
By now, like 5 years of running like that, like I feel like I'm on empty. So in a weird way, so composing things the last year, like with these sort of text pieces that we were talking about today, it's like, is this a way I can stay engaged with the world and also be home? And not on an airplane or like driving 100 nights a year, sort of in addition to the teaching I'm doing. And like the thing I'm feeling like just drained for right now too is like that intake time. Just like when can it be quiet, and like when can I really take a long view and figure out what the next thing I want to make is? Because like right now it's just run, put another thing out, run, put another thing out. And projects I started working on in 2011 and 12 now are up to speed. But now what does the art mean? It's a tough time for me to figure that out.
So you mentioned tenure, and I'm sorry, Ben, it's your turn. You mentioned tenure, and I have a serious question. Do the musical masterpieces go on? How do they go on your tenure file, or do they?
That's great.
Well, in a way, I'm serious. In a way, I'm totally serious question because I have to do the tenure thing now too, and I guess so does Megan and Ben. But depending on who you talk to, I mean, some people say, "Oh yeah, you gotta." Every time you sneeze, it goes in your tenure file, and people put things as simple as "I read a PAS article this week," and it goes in their tenure file, which I think is absolutely ludicrous. But yeah, I don't know. Is there an answer to that?
I mean, I suppose it's for individuals. Like those things for me are bonbons. I was on the road with Sarah Hennies in 2013, and she was like, "Wouldn't it be funny if there was the go-kart string quartet? Like somebody has to do this." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that would be totally funny. I could hang a little teeny gong up in my shower and 50 people would think that's funny, and that's all it needs to be, right?" I'm saying that, and I realize, as always, I'm talking out of both corners of my mouth when I say it. They don't go in my file. I don't think of them as like art trying to advance my professional aims, if that makes sense. That's a horrible sentence to say when I say it, because it's not entirely true, and it's an awful mix of things. But yeah, that at least I've made those just like hopefully somebody will see this and it'll make them laugh at lunchtime, and that's enough. That's all it is.
And they certainly do that, and that's definitely what I think they do for all of us. But I don't know, man. I mean, if other people are putting in their tenure files, I just read. Oh, nice drum, Megan.
Thank you.
I mean,
do I have to play car on that now? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, if other people are putting in their files, I read the following article today, and that's acceptable to some committees. Man, I mean, I feel like I wrote this series of satirical pieces that are pretty widely received and known. I don't know. I would accept it.
It's occurred to me in the past, and I feel dirty doing it, and therefore I won't. And I suppose we're knocking on wood, but I'm busy enough otherwise that I don't think it's like the file needs padding such that like we had an awesome garden in 2011. Like it's like that. Like I'm growing tomatoes, I guess, but tomatoes that will make you laugh when you eat them, I guess. But this is
tomatoes.
This is getting more complicated too, and like we don't want to bring up politics, and I want to be careful and be even-handed about things too. But it's like this stuff is related. Like, what am I doing now in 2017? Like I make this really, like it's a really abstract sort of sound art that I'm involved with. And I make these goofy little jokes that make fun of aspects of really abstract sound art that about 25 people care about. Meanwhile, like the way I feel in the world right now it's intense. Like I don't know how to make sense of that. And as a result, if I sing a Billy Bragg song with cool, my stuffed cow like now has a message about healthcare on it too. Like that will make me feel better, and 25 people will chuckle about that while they're calling their representatives. Like I don't know even if that's more contribution, but it's like how is this relevant to anything? And I'm a mess on this topic, and it's related to generally what is it to keep making things, and are you depleted versus are you feeling ready with a lot of things? And this is especially, I don't want to conjecture for other people. For me, it's a really confusing time, and I don't really know what that means. So so from that standpoint, putting these things in a tenure file, that seems grotesque. Like the world has bigger issues right now than like whether or not I have 47 or 26 entries in a database for a thing.
Right.
It's how does this have any impact to the world? But how does anything I do have any impact to the world? These are just little bonbons. They're jokes. But yeah, so this is compulsion. I'm perseverating on this, avoiding a negative outcome. I guess now I'm coming to that realization as we bring that up. But
it's also our responsibility, I feel like, as people in higher education, I don't know, as people and as artists to, be thinking of these things anyway. So I think, I don't know.
Well, it's nice of you to leave it
to what has to be in these boxes,
Yeah. Well, it's nice of you to do the conservative thing and choose not to. I feel like from my point of view, it's man, just because it's funny doesn't mean it's not serious, and also doesn't mean it's not good. And actually, it's really good commentary on a lot of
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah.
It's really clever. I think that's right, Megan. Yeah, Ben. I'm sorry. You had something to say, Ben.
Yeah, well, this wasn't the thing I was going to say, but that reminds me, have you guys, there's a Calvin and Hobbes comic about this where he talks about high art and low art and how, comics are perceived as low art and, this painting is perceived as high art. Then they're saying, what if there's a comic of a painting of a comic? It's one of those little brain twister things. But anyway, my thing I was going to say, Tim said, there's my non-answer, and I had a non-answer to that question as well that Laurel asked about compulsion and addiction. And one thing I thought of was John Cage, who, if you remember from many episodes ago when we talked about him, he took this pledge when Schoenberg offered to teach him, and he said, I'll dedicate my life to music or something like that. And he took that pledge very seriously throughout his life. And I was watching a documentary about a week ago on Netflix called Abstract, and it's really interesting, different designers on each episode. But there was one person said something, and I just Googled to find who the original quote was from. And this quote is from Chuck Close, who's an American painter and photographer. And to me, I guess for me, performing is compulsory. I have to do it. I wouldn't call it an addiction. It's just what I have to do. But as far as practicing, I wanted to read this quote from Chuck Close. He says, "I always thought that inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us show up and get to work. You sign onto a process and see where it takes you. You don't have to invent the wheel every day. Today you'll do what you did yesterday, and tomorrow you'll do what you did today. Eventually you'll get somewhere. Every great idea I ever had grew out of work itself. If you're going to wait around for the clouds to open up and lightning to strike you in the brain, you're not going to make an awful lot of work." And I think that's fantastic. And I have a student that's preparing for a recital right now, and he's constantly asking questions, which is, of course, I'm the teacher, that's what he's supposed to do. But at the end of the day, it's dude, stop asking questions, go in a room, get your thing done. We can sit here and talk about music all day, but if you haven't put the time in to learn the notes, it doesn't matter what I say. You need to go in the room, stop waiting for inspiration, stop waiting to feel like I'm waking up today and I'm going to do this thing because I'm, feeling inspired about it. It's just go whether you feel like it or not, close the door, lock it, and do your thing.
Yeah.
So that's my take on practicing. It's not addictive, nor is it compulsory. It's just what you do as a musician. And I think that's just a fantastic way of putting it. Inspirations for amateurs. Just go do your thing.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. Well, I would think that, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us sitting here, which are all in the same tiny little niche of this creative domain, I doubt any of us are ever at a loss for ideas of things, of projects, and
I already have my repertoire
That's not
for everything for the next 3 years picked out.
yeah, I have so many ideas. Tim, are you about to? I saw your hand, but I don't know what it means.
I think maybe how do I say this? I mean, a lot of things I do, how do I say this? It's not that they don't require time investment, but I don't need to spend 3 weeks in the woodshed to make an event happen as much as I need to have a clear idea of maybe what I'm aiming for, in a new piece or something. If I'm improvising, I can just show up. So at least for me, that sort of time commitment issue is really flattened, where it approaches one-to-one, where it's in order to make something, I have to be there with people in New Orleans on Thursday night. Otherwise, there's not a sense of that continuing, such that it's not a thing I can make sort of on my own time, at my house, sort of figuring out what I'm going to do next. So, where am I going with this?
So do you think that you feel more creative in that, or
no? It's I feel less active, and I related to okay, just get to work every day, that for me, because I'm not necessarily, it's rare. I have 1 or 2 recitals a year where I have to shed a lot of notes, and otherwise I'm doing things where it's okay, make sure the speaker element sounds right, and if I have my idea right, then the things I'm doing don't require a heck of a lot of physical skill. But so my chewing on this is being able to walk my neighborhood, or being able to hang out in my living room for a while, just sort of chewing on the thing. But it looks like reading books or watching movies or just being able to hang out and sort of figure those things out, which doesn't look a heck of a lot like practice, but for me ends up being this awful combination of chewing on a problem and worrying about not having time to chew on a problem. Mm-hmm. But show up every day. There are an awful lot of days this time of year, especially, that are all I can do is show up, teach 6 lessons, move a marimba, teach my rehearsal, go home, stare at a wall. I have to accept my Tuesday, Thursday, Friday out of this next 6 days are out, except for me showing up. And that, at least for me, feels like it's unable to sustain itself. I have to find it in pockets, as we all do. But for me, that feels really disruptive in a way that I'm guessing it does for you too, but maybe doesn't quite match up.
Yeah, I definitely feel that too. I think it helps just by saying, yeah, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or whatever days it is are out, and that's okay. Weren't you talking? I don't know if we were talking about this in the podcast, but no, it wasn't. It was just with a friend about the same thing, kind of with spending time for yourself or relaxing. I'm okay, I took a Sunday morning off, and it's a different story of taking a Sunday morning off and feeling guilty about it because you intended to do something else, and taking a Sunday morning off and enjoying it, taking time for yourself. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I think it's really important. I read in that Super Brain book, I don't think I reported on this, but there's the Center for positive psychology or something out at UC San Diego says there are 7 different things that you need for a healthy mind. And, one's time in, you've got playtime, focus time, downtime, physical time. And I'm not going to be able to just name the others off my head, but one of the big ones is you have to have time where you're doing nothing, if you will. Purely enjoyment time, connecting time with other people or with yourself, whatever it might be.
I totally agree with that. My schedule this semester, every weekend I've had stuff. I was judging in Houston one weekend. I went to TMEA. I was there the next weekend. I've had 4 or 5 rehearsals. And yesterday was my first day off in literally months. And I did absolutely nothing. And today I feel so refreshed and I'm being so productive because of it. So I absolutely agree that the time off is well spent every now and then. Every now and then being the key.
I shouldn't make assumptions about people's ages, but so I turned 40 in January, and I'm noticing I need 2 or 3 of those in a row now, to recharge the way that where one of them would have done when I was 30, and that has an impact on the thing that we're talking about right now too, which is interesting. I'm experiencing in a really physical way right now that I think sort of jars against all of the things we're talking about right now too.
Especially as you get older, and if you have a family and those things come around, if you have kids, you need to spend time with your kids, and you're not going to be productive in the practice room if you're just feeling miserable about not spending any time with your family. So yeah,
I'm
totally.
Or you're exhausted.
I'm 23, so I don't know what you guys are talking about.
I'm
One arm
21.
push-ups for all of you. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, sure, I can do
Yeah.
that. I've been practicing all day today, and I'm gonna keep going right after this. Just like,
All right. Yeah.
I'm just gonna be like chopping out. Hey, I have just for the sake of variety, I'll do this real quick. It's kind of a broader art topic, and we talked about this back on episode 66. It's just a little news update. But do you guys remember when I did a way too long of a segment on Wonder Woman being named an honorary UN ambassador?
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Not anymore?
So yeah, do you remember why it was interesting? Was because there were all these protests and objections, and these groups had problems with this nomination, and she has been removed from a honorary UN ambassador.
Wow.
So and that actually happened. Sorry, that actually happened December 16th, I think. So it's just gone unnoticed. At least I just happened to bump into it. So
There were
anyway,
a few other things going on in the national news.
there were some other things going on for sure. So so the UN drops Wonder Woman as honorary UN ambassador. There was this petition. They were going for, the opposition to her appointment was going for 50,000 signatures on this petition. They got just over 44,000 by the time they made the decision to remove Wonder Woman. And now the petition's still up. You can read it. I don't know if you can still sign it, but now it's just over 45,000. So they were short of their goal, but it was enough to get her pulled. And I read it. It's not very long. You can read it at www.thepetitionsite.com. And if you just Google that along with reconsider the choice of honorary ambassador for the empowerment of women and girls, you'll certainly run into it. And from what I could tell, the only problem they had with her was how she's dressed. And that's literally it. And it just made, and we talked about that on the episode, of course, and that being the main point that they were upset about. And after looking through it more and more, I still agree with what we kind of came to the conclusion of last time, which is like, yeah, sure. I mean, considering that Tinkerbell and Winnie the Pooh have also been honorary ambassadors, why the hell not? Wonder Woman certainly stands for something stronger than they do.
Tinkerbell is just as scantily clad as Wonder Woman. Why is it okay for Tinkerbell? Because she's technically a fairy, not
I know. Well, and let me just read you this thought I had. This is called Casey Thought at 3 a.m. this morning. So, yeah, I woke up really early. I got excited about the snow day. But Casey thought at 3 a.m., yes, consumerism and pop culture is way too overly sexualized. Undoing this is one of many goals and achievements, not just that of feminist movements, but also historically authors, philosophers, artists, teachers, and even politicians. The main objection in the petition is that Wonder Woman's overly sexualized image is a bad influence and a bad example of what girls should be. Now, please keep in mind that Wonder Woman was created at a time, 1941, when exposed kneecaps and exposed clavicles were considered too much. And this exposure is actually part of her message and symbolism. So the many goals of feminism fights have been for and are still the right to vote, hold public office, to work, to earn fair wages, have equal pay, to own property, to receive an education, to enter contracts, to have equal rights within marriage, and to have maternity leave. Feminists have also worked to promote bodily autonomy, integrity, and to protect women and girls from rape, sexual harassment, and domestic violence. So Wonder Woman's appointment would not aid in the desexualization of the general pop culture environment. I certainly concede that. However, she certainly has many more hits and misses in the previously stated list above. So if they're, I don't know, I guess I really just think they're wrong and think she stands for so much more strength and equality. And again, I'm not a comic book nerd, but I've learned so much about Wonder Woman, and Laurel has learned so much about Wonder Woman and her creator in figuring this out. And hell, I ran into a comic where she kicks the living shit out of Batman in a comic. Like, come on, that's
Right.
great. You know, she beats up Batman, you know, and she's beat up Superman, and you know, I don't know, I just don't get what the deal is.
Yeah. Well, it goes all over me in that, okay, if it was Wonder Woman, how do you make it clear with the cuffs or something? But would these people be happy if they put her in like pants and a jacket and a blouse that wasn't too tight? Is it then okay that she's an ambassador? Because she would still have the whole history of the comic books behind her. All of that story would be exactly the same.
I know.
That,
there would be another reason. It wouldn't matter at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I thought I didn't want to take too long on this because it's come up more than once on the episodes. So I just thought I'd update you guys that that's where that ended up settling. So it's kind of interesting.
Thanks for the update. That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and I guess I think it's overall disappointing. Ben, what do you got for us today?
Yeah, so like we talked about earlier, my I think my first exposure to Tim was the musical miniature videos, and specifically the corporal parody one. So I figured since we have the expert here, we would talk about the percussion works of Vinko Globokar today. And it's been interesting recently with Christopher Rouse and John Seri. Like, I thought I knew their percussion works, and then when I started digging, I found so many more that I didn't know. So I knew of 2 works by Globokar, which will be the first 2 I talk about. But it turns out he has, I think I came up with 6 works for solo percussion. And of course, some of his chamber music has percussion as well. We're going to stick to the solo works today just for time's sake. So Vinko Globokar was born in Anderney, France, July 7th, 1934, and he grew up, he moved to Yugoslavia in 1947, and as a music student, he studied and played jazz trombone. He moved to Paris in 1955 to study at the Paris Conservatory. He studied composition with René Leibowitz, who was a student of Schoenberg, one of Schoenberg's actually most prominent students, as well as trombone with André Lafosse. He moved to Berlin in 1965 to study composition with Luciano Berio, and later in the 1960s he studied with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. From 1967 to 76, he taught at the Cologne University of Music, and 1974 to 1980 he was the director of instrumental and vocal research at IRCAM. He's premiered works by Berio, this is on trombone, he's premiered works by Berio, Kagel, Stockhausen, and Takamitsu, who are, if you're not familiar, 4 of the most heavy hitters of sort of contemporary composition. So if you're interested in more information about Globokar's sort of thoughts on composition, especially for percussion, there's actually an article in Percussive Notes that he authored, and it was translated to English, and it was in 1992, and it was called Anti-Bada Boom, which I love the title.
That's stunning. Yes.
And,
sorry, I didn't get excited. That's really good. Yes.
Basically, his philosophy was in writing for percussion. It seems like so many people are interested in the diversity of sounds that percussionists can produce, and so they start grabbing like all sorts of cymbals and drums and wood blocks and everything in the kitchen sink. And he said, like, you can also do the same thing with one instrument, like if you tap on it with your finger, or if you scrape it, or if you rub it. So it's a really interesting article where he talks about just how many sounds you can get out of one instrument and how much of an interest he took in that. So he wrote this large collection of solo and chamber works for an ensemble of 10 players called Laboratorium between 1973 and 1985. This group had 2 percussionists in it. So he wrote 1 work for 10 players, 2 works for 9 players, 3 works for 8 players, and so on and so on. So of the solo works, there were 2 of them that were for percussion. One was called Touché. It was written in 1973. It's for solo, percussion, plus voice. It was written for Jean-Pierre Drouet. Basically, he takes the text of Bertolt Brecht's Galileo. It's a play. I think it's 6 acts of it in total. And the text has been translated, I think it was originally in German. It's been translated to French. And you have like a small setup of, I think it's 6 instruments, and each one is supposed to imitate the sounds of the French vowels. So you recite this play, and as you recite it, you are playing on these percussion instruments to match up with the vowel sounds that you're saying. And it's very tricky. I started learning it one time, but it's very tricky. It's an extremely fast piece to get between these instruments. And one thing real quick about these Globokar works is there are fantastic YouTube recordings of all of these. One is, there's a recording of Jean-Pierre Drouet playing Touché. Also, Colin McCall and Morris Palter both have just amazing recordings of this piece on YouTube. So if you're interested, definitely check out those recordings. The next work, also from that same Laboratorium collection, was from 1985. It is called Corporel, and I'm sure probably most people listening are familiar with this work. It was written for Gaston Sylvestre, and it's a work for the human body. And again, it's sort of this exploration of like how many different sounds can you get out of just the human body itself. So there's, all sorts of manipulations of the body. An interesting fact about this piece is Stephen Schick, I think this is true, makes all of his students learn this piece. I think it's their first piece they study with him. So yeah, it's a piece that really pushes you outside of your boundaries of comfort for, obvious reasons of you're sitting on stage partially undressed and there's no instrument to hide behind, no music stand to hide behind. It's all you. So like I said, those were the two familiar works that I knew of, and both of those are addressed in more detail in Steve Schick's book, The Percussionist's Art, which if you're interested, definitely check those out. The four other works I found, there's a work called Ombre from 1989. That is, I think, a German title, not the French ombre for friend. The translation of the title is Shadow. It is for solo percussion with singing and chanting with electronics. And if you look at the setup for this one, again, there's a great YouTube recording. It looks like sort of pieces of a drum set with a few additional small instruments included, including a flexitone, which I love, and ratchet and some woodblocks. And there's also electronics in this one, which it reminded me a lot of a piece by Alejandro Viñao. It's sort of like not what I was expecting from the electronics. It's very sort of hip-hop drum beat in that piece. The next piece is from 1994 called Dialogue über Erde, or Dialogue on Earth. It's also for solo percussion. It was premiered by Vanessa Tomlinson. It's a large multi-percussion setup which contains a tub of water with underwater microphones. If you've played like water gong or anything like that, you're familiar with if you dip an instrument into water, it generally lowers the pitch of it. So there's like this little set of like metal wind chimes that are dipped, like shaking, and then you dip them into the water. There's like a bell and a maraca, the different things that you're dipping into the water, it changes the timbre, which is pretty cool. From 1997, he has a piece called Pensée écartelée, or in English, Thought Quarterly, also for solo percussion, and it's a large multi-percussion setup, and it's again with voice, and there's some corporal-like use of the body in that, with like slapping the cheeks and that sort of thing. And then the last work from 2008 is, the title is very long and in French, so I'll just read the English title. It's called Beyond a Study for Percussion. And this piece, there's, again, a fantastic YouTube recording of a guy named David Schatzko playing it. And instead of trying to summarize it myself, I found a review of it by David Perlman, who was doing a review of David Schatzko's performance. And I just wanted to read the review because I think it sums it up so much better than I could. He says, if the percussionist is interested only in percussion, Globokar says, they can simply play through sections A to P without stopping. If, on the other hand, the percussionist is interested in things other than percussion, such as fencing, karate, the production of noises with the body, the variety of cries, or mime, he can invent 6 short performances and place them in a suitable space outside the scope of the percussion. The list of other interests he gives is much longer than the few I have cited, but no matter, because Schatzko, of course, chose nothing from the list, opting instead for a dexterous little episode of swishy casting with a fly fishing rod, followed by 5 bouts of chopping, dicing, dusting, cooking, and consuming a meal on stage, each episode cunningly and ferociously amplified. As the piece proceeded, one had to deal with the somewhat alarming realization that not even artistry of the highest order could hope to match the percussive and compositional wizardry of a piece of meat frying on a plate. Smelt good, though. So yeah,
Dave,
that's
if you're listening, that's as awesome a write-up as there gets.
Yeah.
I guess that's. I'm glad you mentioned them, especially that he is a good friend of mine from grad school, and he's someone who's like sort of exposed me to the little bit that I have for these percussion solo pieces that are less familiar to me. But he and his significant Nikki Caesar are both like performance art historians and scholars too. So like that's a thing that they're really well read about. Like. So topics concerning a body and space, and like of course his interpretation like is as all encompassing and as wide as we go for that. He's phenomenal, and like cool. That's the heart of his repertoire and who he is and what he does. It's spectacular.
And like I just wanted to add on a personal note for this stuff. Like I'm not gonna like name names, but there are certainly contemporary pieces of music that people would describe as bleeps and bloops pieces that are very out there and sort of textural and timbre oriented, that I enjoy many of them, but I think the general audience doesn't really get. And like, I hate to say it like this, but if I were to perform King of Denmark on a recital, my parents would not love it. That's the gist of it. But these Globokar pieces, when I see a good performance of them, it's like, hell yeah, anyone in the world that watched a good performance of Touche would be amazed by it, I think. I mean, it's just, they're such striking semi-theatrical pieces, and that it's just a great performance of these pieces just transcends the fact that, quote unquote, they're weird. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah.
So Tim, have you played any of these? I'm assuming you played Corporal.
Well, and actually, yeah, I suppose making a movie out of that with my wife's like toy stuffed cow is a way of getting my own fear about the thing too. Like I was terrified to play it for years. Like, I saw friends do it in the 90s, and it was like, I love you. Like, why are you doing this to yourself, sort of thing. And it's really frightening. And I suppose that's a thing you can't separate from its text and its topic. Like it's a piece about torture, and it's like that's inseparable from Globokar's politics. And like why do I want to put myself through that? Why do I want to put my friends and neighbors through that? Like there's a thing I think we go through like when we're younger in terms of challenging our audiences with a capital C is like something that makes us feel valuable. And I remember going through that stage in my early 20s, and like, so this thing was a milestone with respect to that topic versus why do I need to brutalize myself and my neighbors? And things come around to politics, I guess, too. So we invaded Iraq the second time, and that seemed a relevant time for me to get over my own fear about the thing.
Yeah.
So there are ways to think about sort of that body of work that are about finding the variety of sounds from your body, and there are ways of thinking about that work that the use of a body in space has something to say about the larger world, which is something I'm not really schooled on, and that Dave and Nikki are particularly careful and schooled about. But actually, there is something about ideal egalitarianism versus like power relationships and suppression, right? That's like text of that piece, and like that's not unrelated in a soft way to some things that we were talking about this afternoon. But like his politics in Europe are that. I know his music way better as an improviser, actually. Like as a trombonist, he's one of the folks besides Stuart Dempster in the 60s and 70s that are extending the sounds that a trombone can make. Right. So he is an improviser with a group called the New Phonic Arts Group in the 60s and 70s. That they're as you mentioned, he worked with Stockhausen. Like I think like they're on the recordings of the Intuitive Music and Austin Siebentagen. Like so, they're the musicians for that. And he still tours a fair bit, like intersecting with people in Europe and like in Britain that I would think of as folks like, who schooled in sort of the beginnings of the thread of free improvisation that I'm on. New Phonic Arts Group. I just lost my second point about that, so we can sort of wrap it up that way.
Yeah, the thing about Corporal, I hate to be this plain about it, but the teeth clicking in it, I just don't know if I could do that. Like,
Is it like the nails on a chalkboard?
It's just like
the styrofoam, like we talked about on Sunday.
No, it's not the sound of it. It's like the action of it. Like
the action.
Yeah, because you have to like click really loud. Like, I mean, you're projecting to the whole audience. I'm like,
yeah, I do think I'd have a hard time with that.
like
too.
my poor dentures.
Well, but I mean, this is a premise about the thing. Like, I don't think like that statement doesn't work if it's not an extreme experience. And
yeah,
like,
exactly.
So,
yeah, I mean,
so like we talk about interpreting, like when we interpret, we project our ideas out to the audience. Like, like here's the thing that I have that I need to get across to somebody else who is different from me, who is. I'm all about power relationships today. Like, who bought a ticket, who's coming to listen to something that I'm going to give down in this direction to them. Like, so they have a passive relationship and with this object that if I'm strong enough to project outwards, they're going to have this thing. So that puts you in an impossible circumstance because there's no way to project your teeth clicking enough that it's going to get out there.
Yeah.
But there is a way to unask the question about it too. Like, there's another way to inhabit something like that. And I imagine actors like have stronger ideas about this sort of thing too. Like I'm not projecting this thing so much as I'm embodying the thing. Like now I'm living the experience of whoever this character is that I am trying to put on. So then like, okay, so the point is the teeth clicking sound, but the point is not the teeth clicking sound as much as, so I'm grabbing my hair and it pulls my head this way. And it leads this event where like the strain of doing the thing, I don't want to say it's a thing that projects, but like I have to experience that. And then if I do so, somebody else will also take it from the outside. Yeah. So I go through something extreme and like that levels the playing field as well too. Like we're all participants in something that's extreme. And now your audience, in an odd way, this is going to sound harsh, but like, so they're not a spectator, they're complicit in the thing. So it's not about the teeth clicking. Like, so the teeth clicking is a vehicle through which this larger thing sort of comes through. Like, and I get it. I remember physically having a lot of reactions like that. The teeth clicking hurts. Like my eye socket sound hurts as an uncomfortable, like in a flash of light sort of way, that's trouble. Like, and I have to accept like at the end of this experience that perhaps I'm not going to be in shape to do the next thing. Like that's a really rigorous thing to go through. And for example, while someone like has to present a thing like in the context of a recital as often as not, like it's always struck me like what a ludicrous thing. Like you're gonna do this thing and then you're gonna come back with a marimba solo. Like it's nonsensical. Like the statement you've made is bigger than that container. And if it's done it's right, has taken everyone else outside that container as well. You know, that was terrifying. Ben, that's terrifying to do. And I remember that scared me for 10 years. And now I can make jokes about it with the stuffed cow. Yeah. Because like it lightens my own fear of the thing. Totally interesting.
Yeah. And also I know I keep saying like there are great YouTube recordings. There's an amazing YouTube recording of none other than Steve Schick doing Corporal. Yeah, and again, like you just have to check it out. I mean, it's just not that a YouTube recording can do that piece justice, but Steve Schick can, so.
You know, Ben, you saying the clicking the teeth would hurt. I think when you're practicing, yes, and when you're doing, especially like you have to get that sound. I know that.
I mean, it's not even that it's not the hurt. It's just like I have this thing about my teeth. Like I'm very. I don't know.
But when you're on stage, I bet when you're on stage and you're performing, man, hitting yourself like that is gonna feel great. Because you're amped up, you know.
Ben, try
That's
it right
what
now.
I was about to say. Yeah, like for all the talk about this.
Oh, the teeth. No, I will not do the teeth.
Like for all the talk about it, the thing that sounds most interesting is like you have to be so committed. Like that's what's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean that's
so tired of going to concerts and playing in concerts, and it's just like, yep, you practiced that. You sure did, buddy.
Yeah.
That was good.
What are you saying?
Yeah, it's just like it's boring and it doesn't mean anything, and that.
Well, that's and that's like the whole. I mean, not that we're talking about him today, but Mauricio Kagel with
Dressur.
Dressur, yeah. It's like the whole point of it is the spectacle of it. Like you can't fake that. And so and I mean maybe that's why I found so many great recordings of these pieces is because. Literally the only way to get through the piece is to give a spot-on amazing performance of it. If you can't do that, you haven't really gotten through the piece, unlike, anyone can fake their way through a Beethoven piano sonata or something,
I would argue, I don't know,
Not
I've seen some Dressur videos that were pretty atrocious because everything is
Dressur videos.
Yeah, that's true.
It's all just representational.
Yeah.
It kind of drives me batty. Anyway.
I personally think, we talk about pieces like this that conceptual pieces being more challenging for audiences. I think a big part of it is it lacks what I've called in my presentations in a very general way the athletic appeal. You know, when you see someone do this, if you're not informed and not seeking, you know, a message to comprehend, the first thought that comes to a lot of people's minds is like, well, wait, I can do that.
Yeah.
You know, and then you say the same thing about, these people say the same thing about minimalist art. You see, look at Blinky Palermo painting, and there's a red square in the corner, and they say the same thing. They go like, well, wait, that's not hard. I can do that. So like in both cases, they're lacking the athletic
the intellectual. Yeah, and I mean, one thing that Svet Stoyanov once said to me is like, I think he was talking about Steve Schick, and he said Steve could sell ice to an Eskimo. I mean, the way he presents it is so amazingly compelling that yeah.
Well, way to go, Ben. That's a really cool talk we just got out of that. Let's do some of these Facebook questions for Tim. Or actually, Tim, did we talk about the new Phonic Arts Group?
I think it's worth checking out on recording, definitely. And I can't remember. I mean, Globokar was in the U.S. on tour. I remember when I was in grad school. This is maybe 2001, and I'm not sure he's been back since. But he is still out there making this stuff. I would follow up with other linking piece too. Like I know, Ben, you were talking about solo pieces, but there is also a quartet Quadrat that's graphic score, and sort of that stems from his relationship to a group called Quater Helios, which was special and really making interesting things in France in the 80s and 90s especially. But they're all composers and improvisers, and Lee Kwan Nin, who's an improvising percussionist that played in that group, also is like basically invented the sound palette for pretty much everybody who plays what I do. Like so like it's interesting. So like there are pivot figures like with work like on either side of, we think of strict composition and improvisation, and it's like sort of this like shared palette of stuff that I think is really important and makes them special. So I think to really, it's not fair for me to say to understand it you have to know this, because you know that says you can't have an experience just sort of hanging out around a thing. But like if you've seen either side of that, like I think you get a perspective that you wouldn't have otherwise. That's like a reason why the stuff is special.
Yeah, very cool. Well, Tim, we have a couple of good Facebook questions, it looks like, and I think they're generally pretty short. Some I think we've covered. Let's see, how about, here we go. This one's from Logan Ball.
Hi, Logan. This is great. It's like a call-in show. Yeah. Hi, Logan. How are you? From East Tennessee. Hope you're doing well.
Logan asked, for a student of yours that is becoming more and more interested in sound exploration and improvisation, what are some resources, references, or pieces you suggest that he or she could investigate?
I should preface this by saying, when you see something alive in the wild, it's much different than when you see it in the zoo. At least for the sorts of things that interest and excite me, like you get as much of an experience, like, so for like his geography suggests, like if there is something happening in Nashville or Louisville, like he would see something in the thread of things that I think is important that would like open his mind up. And that not that he needs his mind open, because Logan is awesome, but right, like he could see a thing that would expose him to something sort of alive, like in its context and in its environment, that like I can't really compare to some composed music or to recordings either. But what's been really important to me? Alvin Lucier's music, Pauline Oliveros, obviously, Stuart Dempster, the founding sort of British free improvisers sort of that toured America. So that's Derek Bailey and Evan Parker, and AMM, who are still active in Britain today. AMM sort of crosses with Christian Wolff. If folks are hanging out around the Northeast and run into him in New Hampshire, for example, like that's a pivot point. And I suppose the best I can do is sort of advocate for my friends and neighbors. Olivia Black in Chicago is phenomenal. It's just an astounding sound artist and deep thinker. Seth Cluett in New York is someone I'm fortunate to know. it's cheap of me to go into my back catalog, but as we all are, I'm lucky that I get to hang out with my friends, and they just happen to be, in my opinion, the deepest and heaviest people doing these sorts of things. So Greg Stewart's work as an improviser and interpreter of Michael Pizarro and Jörg Frei's music. Sarah Hennies is an extraordinary artist with something singular that I have never seen or heard before from anyone. These are starting points, but that once you find out with anything, once you start kicking rocks around, now one thing leads you to 6 others, and now you're a rolling ball of collected stuff where everything's touching everything else, and you don't know how to talk about it. But yeah, I guess those are places to start, but you just kind of go running and you see a thing.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we have a few more. Let's try to just knock through them if we can. We're a little over time, but I think if the content's good, that's always just fine. Our buddy Brian Nosny says, is there a common thread between the improvisations you feel are the most satisfying, either solo or with a group?
When I play, I suppose I'm looking for a sense that I can't expect the next thing that's going to happen, but once it has happened, it's the only thing that possibly could have happened. That's a weird way to say a thing, but it's like this thing has the chance to surprise me in a way that I couldn't have predicted beforehand. But that seems to fit with the voices of people involved. I suppose that's a way to say something feeling authentic as clearly as I have in my own thread, I guess. But
so that experience comes more often when you're with other people because more unexpected things are going to happen.
Absolutely. Right? Solos are really hard for me for that reason too, as they are for most people. How do I get started? I can only start a piece off my own material, and once that happens, it's likely to lead to fewer places because Sarah won't bring a woodblock at 7 minutes that I wasn't expecting, for example. And because in our trio, we speak a similar language, a thing is going to steer in a way that we think it'll work, but will fool all of us over the course of it. That as a player, that's great. And I think that's the thing you can sense, if you're in the room with a thing like this, but not making the sound as well. But
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, let's keep cruising along. Let's see. Michael Standard, if you could, I do like this one. Michael Standard, if you could ask all musicians to be more aware of one thing, what would it be?
Yeah, it's good.
The instrument's not the point. The material's not the point. The material is the door you open that allows for your own perception to change and for anyone else sort of listening and experiencing an event that allows for their perceptions to change as well too. If my reason for being a percussionist is to be a good percussionist, I'm not only far from the path, I don't know where to look for it. And I suppose finding that is the work of somebody's life, and it's a slog a lot, and if you don't have enough time, it's not easy, and if you're not sure where you're going, it's not easy, and when you're sure where you're going, you end up being not sure where you're going 6 months later, and there is no way to negotiate that except to just kind of get your hands messy with it and do it, but the instrument's a vehicle, and it's not the point, and that takes a lot of maturity and depth and time to sort of figure out, and if somebody gets on that path when they're young, I suppose if I'm a teacher, that's what I'm trying to do as much as anything.
Give people
Yeah, well said. That's great. And let's finish up with a question from Ted Jackson. He's one of our favorites on the show. He asks, what's been the largest influence on your musical career, and how has that shaped what you're doing today?
Just pick one.
Good job, Ted. Make him go for it.
Make him sweat. Let's go. Wow, Feeney looks nervous. We hit him with a good one. Okay, I'm 23 years old. I just left a quartet that will remain nameless, but I tend to get asked about a lot on the road. I don't know what the heck I'm going to do next with the rest of my life. I've just moved to Boston. I don't know anybody except for my significant at that time, who's just started a master's degree at NEC, and through her I meet Steve Drury. New music pianists, Sick Puppy, that festival in June.
Yeah.
Calithumpian Consort was a group I played with in Boston, doing notated experimental music for 4 years. Their first concert is the last night of the last iteration of a festival called Autumn Uprising, which turned out to be all the free improvisers in Boston sort of at once. So free jazz sets and people working with sound and people working with with text and wild ideas and video. And this is like their sort of yearly sort of gathering thing, which turned out, after I saw it, ran out of steam, and now ended up being sort of an interesting time in the history of that city. But so there's a trio that night that plays. That's a thereminist, James Coleman. That's a singer, Liz Taney, lives now in Austin, and Tatsuya Nakatani, right? So who I'm sure a fair bit some of you may have run into, because he's on tour with a thing called the Nakatani Gong Orchestra about 300 nights a year, where he tours improv sets and works with musicians wherever he is. And literally he's gone 300 out of 360 days a year. Like, he just lives his life this way. So like, really important people in that community of making music. Here's just, we've all had experiences in a place where you could hear a pin drop, but like literally this is the case. Like, a room of like 200 people is holding their breath while something's just very small and like just filaments of sound sort of like happen like this. And like, oh, I've been waiting to hear this my entire life. Like, I knew this existed someplace, but I don't know how to say what this is or describe it. But there are people that do this? Whoa.
How do I get into
that?
And
then by 2006, like, I'm basically no longer a percussionist. Like, I had to get an academic teaching job to like come back to that side of my background. It was like, let's go run for this. And it's where I found who I am and what I think is important. I can't overstate that.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have those experiences. So so this is mine. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, go Ben.
So I had one more question. Could you tell us about your experience studying with Robert van Sice?
That's fantastic. And a really intense experience, and exactly what I needed at the time that I found. And yeah, not always easy to do. And like, I was lucky. He gave me my own, after about a year, he gave me my own headspace to figure out what the heck I wanted to do, which like at the time, like, like that studio was just sort of figuring itself out, like what it wanted to be, as a graduate institution. And it had a lot of really different personalities in it. And I don't know, I'm lucky, like I got my ass kicked regularly, and also like I got my headspace to figure out things that I thought were important. And I got a lucky homework assignment that put me with like a bunch of awesome musicians that, just like opened my head up and my ears up and my hands up. And it was exactly what I needed, though I didn't know it was what I was asking for in 1999. And I'm lucky to the end of the world that I did it. It hurt. This is a fair way to say a thing, right? Like, as anything does, like, you're growing a new skin. Like, it stings, very but I did. So.
Wow, very cool. Well, hey guys, thanks so much for listening to, what the heck was this? Episode 87, I think. Yeah. Yes, episode 87. And man, Ben, Megan, Laurel, thanks so much for your hard work every week. And Tim Feeney, great to meet you, man.
It's delightful. Thanks for having me with you. It's wonderful to speak this afternoon.
Sure. Okay, everyone, catch you next week. Next week up is Greg Beyer, so we'll catch you then.
Say hey for me.
Bye.
Yep, we'll do. See you guys.
Bye.